What happens when a Hollywood legend walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a warm welcome, and instead finds herself staring into the eyes of a host who has been waiting, patiently, quietly, deliberately, to confront her? Before we dive into this moment, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, hit that like button, and drop a comment right now so you never miss these cinematic deep dive stories. Because what unfolded on that studio stage was not just an interview. It was a collision, a storm, a moment the cameras weren't ready for, and neither was the audience. The studio lights hummed overhead, a low electrical buzz that felt strangely ominous for a Tuesday morning. The View's audience sat packed into the tiered seating, a murmuring sea of excitement. Halle Berry was scheduled to appear in the next segment. Promoting a project, yes, but her presence alone, that mix of grace and steel, always generated a certain electricity. Producers whispered into headsets, stage managers darted around, and the hosts were already at the table, adjusting mics, flipping through cards, and pretending, only pretending, to be casually relaxed. But Sunny had been quiet. Too quiet. She sat with her hands folded, her gaze drifting toward the hallway where Halle would emerge. There was something in her eyes, a flicker, a weight, a tension you could only catch if you looked long enough. Joy Behar glanced at her between jokes. "Everything okay?" Sunny smiled, the kind of tight smile that gave nothing away. "Fine. Just ready." Ready for what? The audience didn't know. The panel didn't know. But something was brewing beneath Sunny's composed posture, like a pot simmering under a lid that hadn't been cracked open yet. Then came the cue. Back in 5, 4, 3. The applause sign lit up. The audience roared. And Halle Berry walked onto the stage. Even for a room accustomed to A-listers, Halle had that rare, effortless presence that made people sit straighter. She wore a sleek charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back so her expression was unobstructed. Open, confident, radiant. She waved, smiled, hugged a couple hosts, and settled gracefully into the seat beside Sunny. For a moment, everything felt normal. Friendly. Routine. But the camera doesn't capture everything. And what it didn't catch, at least not yet, was the way Sunny took a slow breath before turning in her seat to face Halle fully. "So, Halle," Sunny began, voice calm but with a subtle undercurrent, like a violin note played just slightly sharper than expected. "We're thrilled you're here." Halle smiled. "Thank you for having me. Always happy to be here." The audience clapped lightly again, expecting the usual, project talk, inspirational chatter, maybe a funny anecdote. But Sunny didn't reach for her note cards. Instead, she interlocked her fingers and leaned forward. "You know," she continued, "we've had a lot of conversations at this table about responsibility, especially when it comes to how public figures speak about women, relationships, and certain experiences." Halle's expression didn't falter, but there was a small shift in her posture, a subtle straightening of her spine. She recognized the shift in tone instantly. "Of course," she replied evenly. "And recently," Sunny said, her voice steady but growing firmer, "there were comments attributed to you, comments that a lot of women felt were hurtful. Dismissive even." A quiet gasp rolled through the audience like a wave. This wasn't on the cue card. This wasn't the planned conversation. Halle's brows knit, not defensively, but with genuine confusion. "I'm sorry, which comments are you referring to?" Sunny reached down, lifted a card, one that clearly hadn't been part of the original stack, and held it between two fingers. "You spoke about a certain situation involving men and, let's just say, intimate boundaries. And a lot of people felt you were minimizing something serious." Halle inhaled sharply, then exhaled, her voice low. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. My comments were taken out of context. I was speaking about my own experience, not anyone else's." "But do you understand," Sunny cut in, the slightest tremor sharpening her tone, "why some women, especially women who look up to you, felt dismissed?" The room had shifted now. The warm daytime glow felt colder, tighter. The audience leaned forward as one. Halle turned fully to face Sunny. No cameras, no crowd. Just two women locked in a moment neither had planned. "I absolutely understand why people are sensitive about that topic," she said slowly. "And I respect that. Truly. But I never meant to trivialize anyone's pain." Sunny's eyes flickered. Something inside them softened, but only for a second. "Intent and impact," she said, tapping the card lightly against the table. "They're not the same." There it was, the line that struck like a quiet blow. The air became thick. Halle felt it pressing around her, the weight of millions watching, some supportive, some ready to pounce, all expecting her to navigate the minefield with impossible perfection. She took a breath. Sunny, I hear you. And if my words hurt people, even unintentionally, then I want to be accountable for that. But I also think it's important to talk about nuance. Every woman's experience is different. A low rumble of approval murmured through the crowd. But Sunny wasn't finished. Her hands tightened around the card. Nuance matters, she said. But so does recognizing how your voice, your influence, can shape conversations. You know that. Halle's jaw tightened just slightly. Not from anger, but from the emotional pressure building behind her composed exterior. I do know that. And I also know that I've spent my entire career advocating for women, speaking openly, sometimes painfully, about my own trauma. So I'm not sure why you're framing me as if I'm careless. The tension spiked. A few audience members gasped. A couple exchanged wide-eyed glances. Joy Behar shifted in her seat, quietly whispering, "Oh boy," under her breath. But Sunny didn't flinch. She set the card down. Because, Halle, when you said what you said, I clarified it. Halle interjected softly but firmly. I clarified it the same day. Not everyone saw the clarification, Sunny shot back. And that's not entirely my fault, is it? Halle replied, her voice now carrying the unmistakable tremor of someone pushed too far, too fast. A beat. A long, suspended beat. Even the camera's mechanical, emotionless things seemed to hesitate. Halle continued, leaning in, her voice rawer than before. Do you know what it's like to wake up and realize a headline has twisted your words into something cruel? Something you never said, never meant, never believed? Do you know how that feels? Sunny's throat bobbed. She'd been ready for a disagreement, but maybe she hadn't expected the honesty, the vulnerability bleeding through Halle's words. Halle didn't wait for an answer. I'm a black woman in Hollywood, she said, quieter but with a core of steel. People are waiting, always waiting, to turn me into a headline, to catch me slipping, to paint me as something I'm not. So yes, I'm careful. I'm careful every single day. The audience erupted into applause, not loud, not wild, but supportive, empathetic. A wave of sound that made Sunny shift back in her seat, her expression conflicted, layered. The moment wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It had moved into something deeper. Two women trying to speak truth, their truths, while the world watched with unblinking eyes. Sunny exhaled slowly. Halle, I hear you. I do. But I also have a job here. And sometimes that job means asking questions that people want answers to. And I respect that, Halle whispered. The silence after that carried its own strange electric warmth. Not resolution. Not reconciliation. Just truth hanging in the air like dust illuminated under a spotlight. But the moment wasn't done yet. Because suddenly, unexpectedly, an audience member broke the tension. We love you, Halle. The room burst into laughter, then applause. Even Halle cracked a smile, covering her mouth. And Sunny, she let out a short, reluctant laugh of her own. The atmosphere shifted. Just a degree, but enough to allow breath back into the space. And then the producer's voice cut through the room. 30 seconds to break. The host straightened. Halle adjusted her suit jacket. Sunny clasped her hands again, her expression unreadable. But beneath the surface, the story was far from over. Because this wasn't just a conversation. It was the spark, the beginning, of something that would ripple far beyond the walls of the studio. The red light above the camera dimmed. The applause sign flickered off. And just like that, the on-air moment dissolved into a tense, loaded silence. As production assistants darted onto the set with powder brushes, water bottles, and notes for the next segment, Halle and Sunny remained in their seats, still angled toward each other, still carrying the residual heat of their exchange like embers glowing inside a fire that hadn't been put out. Halle adjusted the cuffs of her blazer, but her hands trembled faintly, betraying the adrenaline still rushing through her veins. The words she had spoken, measured, honest, sharp-edged, still hung in the air between her and Sunny like a ghost. Sunny was the first to look away. She turned toward her monitor, pretending to review something on the screen, but her jaw tightened, and the faint rise and fall of her breath revealed that she wasn't as composed as she appeared. The stage manager approached with a clipboard. We're back in 90 seconds, she said with a practiced calm, though even she looked like she'd just walked through a thunderstorm. Halle nodded, offering a polite smile. Sunny murmured something that was half acknowledgement, half dismissal. But the break, those small, precious minutes off camera, was rarely ever silent on The View. Not with 5 opinionated women seated around a table, emotions swirling, producers whispering reminders, and millions waiting to watch every second unfold. It was Whoopi who finally broke the tension. Whoopi, who had been watching the exchange with the quiet stillness of someone who had been in the industry long enough to smell a story brewing from miles away. She leaned back in her chair and said, casually but clearly, "You two gonna finish that conversation on camera or off? 'Cause either way, it's about to trend." Joy snorted. "It's already trending, trust me." Sarah looked like she wanted to say something, but instead took a sip of water, her eyes flicking nervously between Halle and Sunny, as if afraid that one wrong word would set them off again. Halle exhaled and sat back, letting her shoulders drop a little. "I didn't expect that," she admitted softly. Sunny's lips pressed into a thin line. "I wasn't trying to ambush you." Halle looked at her, searching her expression for sincerity. "Maybe not, but it felt like it." Sunny closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, her voice lower now. Not sharp, not confrontational, just heavy. "I get messages every day from women, young girls, survivors. They ask me why celebrities say things that make them feel invisible. I take that seriously. And I do too," Halle said, her tone gentle but carrying a determination that made even Joy sit up straighter. "I've lived that pain too. I don't take any of this lightly." The stage manager clapped her hands twice. 30 seconds. Makeup artists scattered. Assistants retreated behind the cameras. The hum returned. The electric pre-broadcast tension that felt like a physical presence in the room. Sunny and Halle straightened. Cameras reoriented. The audience quieted. And in those last few seconds before the return to live television, they locked eyes. Two women who stood on opposite sides of a moment neither had anticipated. "Ladies," Whoopi said, her deep voice low and grounding, "just breathe." The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The red light flared back on. The applause sign lit up again. The audience clapped obediently, but the energy this time was different. Tighter, expectant, as if they could feel the crackling static that had seeped into the studio since the first confrontation. "We are back," Whoopi announced smoothly. "And we're continuing our conversation with the incredible Halle Berry." Halle smiled politely. Her composure had returned, but there was an undercurrent to her expression, alert, careful, aware. Sunny leaned forward. She hesitated, just long enough for the audience to hold their breath. Then she said, "Halle, before the break, we were talking about accountability, influence, and how words can land differently with different communities. I want to give you space to continue your thought." The phrasing was gentle. The tone wasn't. Halle nodded slowly. "I appreciate that," she said. "And like I said earlier, I never intended my words to hurt anyone. But I think we also have to talk about how quickly narratives spin. How something small can turn into something much bigger than reality." Sunny interjected. "But don't you think?" "Sunny, please," Halle said softly, but with surprising firmness. "Let me finish." The audience murmured in shock, not loud but noticeable. Sunny blinked. She wasn't used to being interrupted on her own turf. But she lowered her gaze and nodded. And Halle continued. "There's a danger," she said, voice steady, "in assuming we know the full story just because a headline told us so. There's a danger in piling on someone without asking, really asking, what they meant. And there's a danger in treating each other like enemies when we're all fighting for the same thing." Sarah placed a hand over her heart. The sincerity hit her visibly. Halle went on, her voice soft but fiercely clear. "Women should be allowed space to explain, to clarify, to be human. I've made mistakes. I've said things imperfectly. We all have. But I refuse to be demonized for a conversation taken out of context." Sunny inhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. "And I refuse," she said, "to sit at this table and ignore the voices of the women who felt hurt." Halle didn't flinch. "I'm not asking you to ignore them. I'm asking you to hear mine too." A ripple of applause broke out in the audience. It swelled, not chaotic, but emotional, supportive. Sunny's face softened by a fraction. "I do hear you," she said quietly, almost reluctantly. "I truly do." But her eyes held something unresolved, something still burning. And she wasn't the only one. Because in the audience, a young woman in the front row suddenly raised her hand. It was bold, unusual, not common on a show this tightly controlled. But she lifted it high, her face earnest, trembling slightly. The hosts looked at each other, confused. Producers backstage froze. The stage manager shook her head frantically. This wasn't protocol. But Whoopi, in a moment of instinct, said, "Yes, sweetheart? You got something you want to say." The young woman stood up, clasping her hands. "Both of you are right," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "And both of you are hurting each other without meaning to." A hush fell over the studio. Halle's breath caught. Sunny turned her head sharply. The woman continued, tears forming. "We look up to you. Both of you. We need you on the same side. Not fighting. Not tearing each other apart. Not today. Not ever." The entire studio exhaled at once. The rawness of the moment was undeniable. Unexpected, unplanned, unfiltered. And the cameras captured every second. Sunny swallowed hard. "Thank you," she whispered. "For saying that." Halle nodded at the woman, her eyes shimmering. "You're right," she said softly. "You're absolutely right." But deep down, under the applause that followed, under the emotional swell of unity, something else simmered. Because when Halle looked at Sunny, she saw it. This wasn't over. This wasn't resolved. This was only shifting, shape-shifting, into something bigger, heavier, and far more personal. The segment wrapped. The applause died down. And as the cameras faded to black again for another commercial break, Halle pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath. Sunny turned away, defensive walls rising again. They had spoken their truths. But those truths had collided like two storms meeting in the same sky. Intense, turbulent, impossible to ignore. And the aftermath? That was still building. Still rising. Still ready to explode. Because the real confrontation, the one that would echo across social media timelines and entertainment headlines for days, hadn't even happened yet. The moment the studio cameras blinked off again, the tension that had briefly softened hardened right back into something sharper, colder, more brittle than before. The applause faded into murmurs, chairs creaked as the audience shifted, and the air took on a thickness that felt almost physical, like the room itself knew something bigger was coming. Halle leaned back in her seat, lifting her chin slightly as she breathed through the emotional weight of the previous exchange. She could feel her heart thudding, an uneven rhythm she tried to calm. The young audience member's emotional plea had struck her deeply. It had reminded her of the responsibility she carried, the eyes that watched her every move, the people who attached pieces of their own healing to her. But Sunny sat stiff, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The muscles in her jaw worked silently as she stared at the table in front of her. Her breathing was shallow, tension rolling through her shoulders like waves. Joy Behar, never one to hide discomfort, finally broke the silence. "Well, that was a lot." Halle let out a quiet, breathless laugh and rubbed her palms against her thighs. "You can say that again." Sarah exhaled audibly and brushed her hair back. "I don't think I've ever seen an audience member stand up and speak like that. That was intense." "Real," Whoopi corrected. "That was real. And sometimes real is what people need." Sunny didn't respond, but something inside her simmered. The stage manager approached. "We're extending the segment after the next break," she said firmly but carefully. "Producers want you two to continue the conversation. Maybe bring it to a resolution. They think the audience is connecting with it." Sunny's head snapped up. "What?" she asked sharply. Halle's brows lifted. "You want us to continue this?" "Lie. It's resonating," the stage manager replied. "Backlash and praise are exploding on social media right now. You're trending in 12 countries already." Joy snorted. "Well, at least they're paying attention. Isn't that the point?" Halle closed her eyes briefly. Of course it was happening. The internet devoured conflict. It wanted drama, confrontation, emotion scraped raw. The producers, sensing a moment that could become iconic daytime television, weren't going to let it go. Sunny pushed back from the table slightly, folding her arms. "I don't do conversations for clicks," she said quietly. Whoopi sighed. "Sunny, that's not what they're asking." "No," Sunny corrected sharply. "That is what they're asking." Halle studied her carefully. The frustration, the fear behind Sunny's eyes, it was deeper than the on-air dispute. There was something unresolved there, not about Halle, but about something in Sunny herself. Halle took a careful breath. "If you want, we can talk privately after. We don't have to do this on camera." Sunny hesitated. The offer hit her differently, a soft one, not defensive, not performative. Real. But then a voice from behind the cameras cut through. 60 seconds. The next segment was happening whether they were ready or not. The makeup artists rushed forward again, gently dabbing at foreheads, smoothing powder, fixing stray hairs. Halle sat still, eyes forward, fighting the rising storm inside her. She didn't want conflict, but she also wasn't going to let herself be painted into a corner she didn't belong in. Sunny stared at her reflection in the small makeup mirror, her chest rising and falling with quickening breaths. "Halle," she said suddenly, voice low. Halle glanced over. "Yes." Sunny swallowed hard. "I'm not trying to tear you down." The sincerity in her voice was shaky, brittle. Halle's expression softened. "I know, but I can't," Sunny hesitated, words catching like thorns in her throat. "I can't ignore when something doesn't sit right with me. I don't know if it's personal or professional or just everything." Halle tilted her head. "We're allowed to disagree, but we don't have to hurt each other in the process." Sunny looked down at her hands, and for the first time she looked tired. Human, not the sharp-witted legal analyst with the calm poise. Not the host who always held her position with unshakable certainty. Just a woman caught between truth and perception. The stage manager lifted her hand. 10 seconds. Sunny inhaled deeply. Halle mirrored her. The tension between them was no longer anger. It was something more complicated. More fragile. Whoopi gave them both a look that said everything without words. "This is the moment. Handle it how you want to remember it." 3, 2, 1. The red light lit up yet again. The camera zoomed in. The audience applauded, but there was a buzz in the air now, like the room itself braced for a storm. Whoopi opened smoothly. "Welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion with Halle Berry, because clearly this conversation has touched a lot of people." Sunny cleared her throat. Her voice, when she spoke, was firm but gentler than before. "Halle, I want to finish something I tried to say earlier. I think sometimes what we all forget, hosts, celebrities, everyone, is that intention can be invisible, but impact is loud." Halle nodded. "I understand that, and I agree. But I think impact shouldn't erase intent either. Otherwise, we're judging each other by the worst interpretation of our words, not the truth of our hearts." The audience reacted with a wave of murmurs. Sunny clasped her hands again. "I didn't want to attack your character. If it felt like that, I apologize." Halle blinked, surprised. The apology wasn't perfect. It was stiff, weighed down by ego and pride, but it was real. "I accept that," Halle said. Sunny continued, her voice cracking the slightest bit. "But I also can't apologize for advocating for women who felt hurt." "You shouldn't," Halle said immediately. "That's your job. And it's your heart, I can see that." Sunny exhaled shakily. This version of her, the vulnerable one, was unexpected. And it tugged at something in Halle's chest. Joy leaned in, sensing an opening. "Can I just say? It feels like you two are having two different conversations layered on top of each other." Sarah nodded. "Yes, that's it. Halle is talking about context and intention, and Sunny is talking about how things land. They're both valid," Whoopi added. "And sometimes the only way to get to understanding is to let each other breathe long enough to explain." Sunny offered a faint, conflicted smile. Halle turned fully to her. "Sunny, may I ask something?" Sunny nodded. "Why did it matter so much to you? This topic, this moment." Sunny's jaw tensed. Her eyes glistened just slightly, so faintly the cameras might have missed it, but Halle didn't. "Because," Sunny said softly, "someone very close to me went through something similar to what people thought you were minimizing. And I watched her struggle. I watched her break. I guess I wasn't just hearing your words. I was hearing her pain." The studio fell silent. Halle reached out, not touching her, but placing her hand in the space between them. A gesture of connection, not intrusion. "I'm sorry," Halle said sincerely. "I really am." Sunny closed her eyes. A tear slipped out, and she wiped it quickly, refusing to let the emotion linger too long on her face. The audience wasn't breathing. The hosts watched quietly, reverently. Even the cameras seemed to hold still. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was human. But something shifted again, this time inside Halle. She straightened slightly. "Sunny, I need to say something too. And it's not easy." Sunny looked up. Halle continued. "I've spent years, decades, being careful about every word I say. Being a black woman in Hollywood means you're afforded less room to be imperfect. Less room to speak with nuance. Less room to be misunderstood. And when my words are twisted, it feels like a door slamming shut on all the things I've worked so hard to build." Sunny nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Halle went on. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for fairness. For the benefit of the doubt. For a moment to explain before I'm judged. Because when I don't get that, it hurts me too. The audience clapped, soft, emotional applause that rolled like a wave. Sunny's lips tightened, and then she nodded. There was no smile, not yet, but there was understanding. And that was enough. But then, just when it seemed like calm was settling, a loud voice pierced the room from the upper audience rows. Sunny was too hard on her. Heads turned. Gasps exploded. Security tensed. Another voice shouted from the opposite side. No, she was doing her job. The room began to crack open with tension, like a fault line splitting. Halle stood halfway from her chair, alarmed. Sunny froze, eyes widening. The hosts exchanged panicked looks. Whoopi slammed her palm on the table. Hey, this is not that kind of show. But the audience had come alive, divided down the middle. Voices rose. Accusations flew. Two strangers in the front row stood up arguing. One defending Sunny, the other defending Halle. It was chaos. A storm inside a studio. Security rushed in, trying to calm people. Producers waved frantically. The stage manager's voice cracked as she shouted for order. And in the middle of it all, Halle and Sunny stood completely still, unmoving side by side, the storm swirling around them like a vortex of emotion and misinterpretation. Halle whispered, "This is what I meant." Sunny whispered back, "This is what I feared." The red camera light was still on. This moment, this raw, unfiltered eruption, was being broadcast live. And nothing on earth was going to stop what came next. Chaos had a sound, a texture, a pulse. And in that studio, under the searing lights, beneath the roar of voices rising like a storm inside a sealed chamber, chaos felt alive. Security wove through the aisles, hands raised, urging people to sit. Audience members stood on tiptoes, shouting, pointing, arguing like the stage had become a battlefield and everyone had chosen a side. The host's attempts to calm the room vanished into the noise. Halle and Sunny remained frozen at the table, not speaking, barely breathing. The storm around them swelled, ricocheting off studio walls until it felt like the very air trembled. "Cut to break," a producer shouted from off camera. But the camera light stayed red. The broadcast continued. The world watched. The storm was not going to wait for permission. Halle stepped back from the table, her eyes sweeping the room, seeing the division, the anger, the emotional fractures she had never intended to create. Her heart pounded as if trying to break through her ribs. Sunny felt something cold curl in her stomach. She had never wanted this. Not this level of disruption. Not this eruption of viewers turning on each other because of something she and Halle had said. "This is enough," Whoopi's voice thundered. It cut through the clamor like a blade. The room stilled, barely, but noticeably. Halle swallowed hard and spoke, her voice trembling but clear. This is exactly what happens when we stop hearing each other." Sunny didn't sit. She didn't look away. Instead, she placed her palm flat on the table, grounding herself. "We're not supposed to be the reason people tear each other apart." Joy nodded slowly. "This argument is turning into something it never should have been." Halle raised her hands gently, addressing the audience. May I say something?" A hush fell, not complete silence, but a drop in the chaos. "Enough," she continued, her voice soft but carrying the steadiness of someone who had lived through fires hotter than this one. "Look at what's happening right now. Look at all of you screaming at each other, fighting each other. And for what? Because two women misunderstood each other? Because we're trying to have a hard conversation without tearing the other down." Sunny looked at her, really looked, seeing not the celebrity, not the icon, but the person. Halle pointed gently toward the seats. "We're human. We get emotional. We get triggered. We care too much sometimes. But you, everyone watching, you can't fight each other because of us. Because of something you think we meant." She inhaled shakily. "Sunny and I don't hate each other. We disagree. But that doesn't make us enemies." Sunny stepped in, her voice steadying. "And let me be clear. I don't think Halle Berry is reckless or dismissive or anything the internet tried to make her sound like. She's one of the most vocal advocates for women in this industry. Has been for decades." Halle's lips parted, surprised, moved. Sunny continued. "I brought up a hard question. And maybe I brought it up too hard. But it wasn't because I wanted to criticize her. It's because sometimes the people we admire the most are the ones we put the most responsibility on. And sometimes we forget they're human." The audience softened. Shoulders lowered. The tension began to melt. Halle stepped closer to Sunny, not touching, but closing the emotional distance. "And I hear you. I truly do. And I know the topic means something deeper to you than just a headline. And I'm sorry if my reaction felt defensive. Sunny nodded. I'm sorry if mine felt aggressive. A beat of silence. Then a woman in the audience, older, wearing a bright red scarf, spoke softly, her voice trembling with leftover adrenaline. We love both of you. We didn't want to see you fighting. Halle smiled with a gentleness that made the entire atmosphere shift. We're not fighting anymore. Sunny offered a small, almost shy smile back. We're talking. Whoopi exhales long and deep, leaning back in her chair. That's what this show is supposed to be. Talking. Not yelling. Not fighting. Talking. Joy raised a finger dramatically. And maybe laughing a little too. The audience let out a relieved ripple of laughter. Slowly, like a wave reversing course, the room calmed. People sat down. The tension dissolved into something quieter, something reflective. Then, finally, the stage manager gave the signal. We're back on track. 30 seconds until we're live again. Halle closed her eyes for a moment, resetting her breath. Sunny wiped the corners of her eyes discreetly. Whoopi patted the table. Sarah exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for 10 minutes straight. The countdown resumed. 5, 4, 3, 2, and the red light blinked on again. Whoopi leaned into the moment like a veteran steering a ship through a turbulent storm. Welcome back, everyone. We've had quite a discussion, both at this table and in this audience. And I think it's important for viewers at home to understand something. She turned to Halle and Sunny. Her expression softened. These conversations matter, but they only matter if we stay open to each other. And that's what happened here today. Sunny touched her chest. I want to thank you, Halle, for staying in the conversation. You could have shut down. You didn't. Halle nodded, voice warm. And thank you for caring enough to push me, even when it was uncomfortable. The audience applauded, not wild, but deeply emotional. A collective exhale. A release. Sarah added, this is what happens when people don't give up on communication. Joy clasped her hands together. And because of that, this might be one of the most honest episodes we've had in years. Halle laughed softly. I didn't expect to walk into all this today. Sunny chuckled. Me either. But their smiles held no tension. No resentment. Only relief mixed with exhaustion. The show wrapped. The outro music played. The hosts stood and hugged Halle, one by one, before the cameras faded to black. And as they went to commercial for the final time, Halle and Sunny shared one last private moment. Halle whispered, I hope you know I respect you. Sunny whispered back, I hope you know I admire you. They both exhaled, the shared acknowledgement bridging the gap the world had been watching unfold. But outside the studio, the world wasn't quiet. Within minutes, the aftermath. Twitter exploded. Instagram lit up. YouTube clips circulated before the show even finished airing. Hashtags sparked fire across every platform. Hashtag Team Halle. Hashtag Team Sunny. Hashtag The View Chaos. Hashtag Women Supporting Women. For every voice praising Halle's vulnerability, another praised Sunny's firmness. For every criticism aimed at one, there were defenses aimed at the other. TikTok creators dissected body language, tone, phrasing. Fan pages froze frames and debated microexpressions. Comment sections flooded with think pieces, emotional essays, arguments that lasted for hours. And yet, beneath the noise, something remarkable happened. Women in comment sections began sharing their own experiences. Survivors spoke openly. People discussed intention versus impact, accountability, empathy, nuance, all the things Halle and Sunny had fought through on air. The moment ignited a conversation the world didn't realize it needed. And for that, despite the chaos, both women were praised as catalysts for change. And now your turn. Before this story ends, I want you to step into the spotlight. What's your take? Did Sunny push too hard? Did Halle handle it perfectly? Were both women right in their own ways? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want more cinematic, emotional, dramatic deep dives just like this, subscribe to Stage View, hit that like button, and share this story with someone who'd love a conversation like this one. More stories are coming. Bigger ones. Deeper ones. More explosive celebrity moments that pull you right into the room. Stay tuned.